This is the HPT.
Sit right down, put on your poker face, you with the big dogs now. Better bring your best game, talk trash all you want. To me it's all the same, you won't leave with much when you come in second place. And I'm the one with the stack showing 7 to the jack. Gonna cry to your mama cause I'm sending you back. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. Last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand.
Hello everyone and welcome to the HPT, where folks just like you can play the great game of poker on a worldwide stage and compete for life-changing money. I'm Fred Bevel, and by my side as always is the talented and ruthless professional poker player, Maria Ho.
Hundreds of players have come to Majestic Star, building a massive prize pool of over $648,000. And when you come to the Chicagoland to play, you better bring your A game. After 2 days of hero calls, bad beats, a little luck, and countless bluffs, we are down to the final 9, and it's stacked with experience and talent.
One of the headlining names still battling for the championship is past HPT champion and pro player Nick Schwarman. Nick won one of our events in Florida and made a deep run in the 2013 WSOP main event. With him is the coolest cat in poker, Amari Doc Love. Amari made the final table here at Majestic Star back in 2011, and he's one of the most respected players in the area.
Aaron Massey has played several HPT events over the years, and my partner next to me has donked off hundreds to him in the cash game. He, along with the other 6 remaining players, are making their first HPT final table. The stacks are deep, and from what I've seen so far, I'm expecting a lot of aggressive action.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's check out the money that's on the line and the starting chip counts and get right to this final table.
Another great prize pool, with all of the players making this final table taking home at least $14,274. But our big winner today, first place prize, is going to take home $152,000 and change.
The prize pool here in the Chicagoland area, always life-changing money. Maria, here are the starting chip counts at this final table.
Amari Love comes into this final table as our chip leader. As you can see, he has just under 2.7 million. John Grace with 2 million is second in chips. We have a few stacks with 30 big blinds or less: Nick Schwarman, George Dietz, and Nemi Allegado, but they are definitely not short by any means.
Blind starting off at this final table at 15 and 30,000 with a 4,000 chip ante. And first to act is John Grace. He is going to fold over to Nick Schwarman. Nick's going to raise with pocket aces. I can see that being a raising hand, Maria. And Nick's raise is going to have everybody fold around. We're on Aaron Massey now. And he also elects to fold. Now over to Amari Love, one of the coolest guys you'll ever meet, not just because of his name. Ed's going to fold. This is George Dietz.
George is in the big blind, and he looks down at King 10 offsuit. Looks like he's going to call the raise.
All right, so first hand of this final table, we're heads up with Nick Schwarman holding the aces. Here comes the flop.
The flop is 8-9 queen with 2 hearts, and that means George has flopped a gut shot straight draw.
I expect a big bet coming from Nick here on the flop. 181,000 in the pot.
It's not a great flop for Nick, though. It's very coordinated. He does have the ace of hearts in his hand, but I think he's checking back just to pot control, because if he got check raised on the flop, it would put him in a pretty bad spot.
8 of club falls on the turn. Action is on George.
And that's the cue for George, I think, to lead into Nick now. But actually, that 8 on the turn is a good card for Nick. He feels like if George did flop 2 pair with queens and 9s, then now Nick's ahead. So he's definitely planning on calling this turn bet.
Nick does make the call as the pot swells to just over 360,000.
There might be a few scare cards on the river that George might be able to bet Nick off his hand, but not the 3 of diamonds. That's definitely a very safe river.
George is staging some chips here. With just king high, he's going to fire a bluff out of position, and it's a big one. 230,000.
I think that's a good bet size by George, if only Nick didn't have such a big hand. But here Nick's just going to call. He doesn't love it, though. You could kind of see the grimace on his face.
Hand's extremely under-rep, so
He says he's extremely under-repped, which he is, so he does call.
Extremely under rep means he hit his hand very well.
Extremely under rep means that you don't really give your opponent an indication of the strength of your hand. Because Nick did check back on the flop, it's hard for George to believe that Nick has an overpair in his range.
And Nick is going to scoop this first pot of the day, a big one too, just over 820,000 in chips. A lot of poker yet to be played as we are on the road to our next HPT champion here in East Chicago. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the HPT, coming to you from the Majestic Star Casino here in Gary, Indiana. It's time to get back to final table action. We'll send things over to Freddie and Maria.
Mari Love remains our chip leader with 2.6 million. John Grace is still in second with just under 2 million. George Dietz is now our short stack with just under 20 big blinds.
Blinds remaining at 15 and 30,000 with a 4,000 chip ante. One hand deep into this final table. Nick woke up with aces, scooped a nice size pot. This hand he has to fold. Now we are over to Nemi Alagado.
He's going to make it 70,000 to go with sixes.
And action folds around to the 2-seat of Aaron Massey. Once a new kid on the block. No, I'm kidding. He never was. Amari Love, next to go. He was once part of Boys to Men. No, I'm kidding about that too. And now over to Edward Oshana, who wakes up with suited ace queen. He's going to make the call.
I like this call by Edward here. I don't really think a 3-bet is needed because Nemi and Edward are both fairly deep, and his hand plays really well post-flop, so there's really no need here to 3-bet and put himself into a tough spot.
Pocket threes for George in the small blind. Why not set mine? He's going to make the call. And the big blind of John Grace is also going to make the call with 4 deuce of spades. Now, this is a situation, Maria, where I don't really feel like it's necessary to defend the big blind.
I think he's getting the right pot odds, though. There's 3 other people in the pot. And obviously, with 4 deuce, you just don't want to get committed if you flop a pair, but I think he's just trying to flop a joint.
By flopping the joint, Maria meant a straight.
The flop is Jack 4-7 rainbow, and they check it over to Nemi, and he's going to continuation bet here. It's a pretty safe flop for sixes in his mind, though, because he feels like he would have heard from somebody if they had a big pair pre-flop, and, you know, he's thinking people with overcards probably missed.
And it looks like Edward is going to float him here on the flop from the button. George is going to fold his pocket threes, and I suspect John's going to fold his 4 deuce here.
I think Edward thinks that his ace high might be good here. He also has backdoor possibilities.
John does elect to lay down his hand, so on the turn we go. Right now, Nemi ahead with his pocket sixes.
Turn card, queen.
The turn is the queen of spades, and now Edward does have the best hand with a pair of queens, and Nemi's going to check to him. It's going to be very hard for Nemi to continue with this hand. There's a lot of overcards to his sixes, and when Edward did just call him on the flop, I think Nemi was thinking he might have had a jack already.
And Edward, as you would expect, is going to bet. He fires 125,000.
It's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's very certain that he has the best hand here, and Nemi is going to check fold.
Maria, I think personally Edward probably would have fired on the button whether he hit that queen or not.
Yeah, and that's definitely the intention when you do float someone, is if you don't hit to improve, then you are hoping that you could just take it away from the opponent when they check to you.
Blinds are going up. They're now 20 and 40,000 with a 5,000 chip ante, as this final table is still in its youthful stages, 9-handed. Aaron Massey here in the 2-seat. No stranger to the HPT. Made an HPT final table right here in the Chicagoland area a couple years back. Amari Love also has final table experience with us. We won't see either of them in this hand yet. And now over to Edward again. And Maria, lightning strikes twice. Ace-queen back-to-back.
And in an unopened pot, Edward is going to raise here. He makes it 85,000 to go.
Now over to John Grace. He's going to lay it down. Nick also folds. Nemi's turn to decide what to do.
Looking for a little payback maybe from the last hand. He's going to complete from the small blind with King 3 of hearts. And the big blind of Joseph Hebda is going to fold. It's a pretty liberal defend, I think, from the small blind. I would like to see Nemi with King 3 suited 3-bet that hand, actually, instead of defend. But the flop is Jack 9-9 2 hearts, and now Nemi does flop a flush draw.
And when you say 3-bet, you're thinking if you're going to play a hand like King 3 suited, you might as well raise with it as opposed to just flatting with it?
Well, I just think that Edward raised from middle position, so, you know, you never know how strong his hand is there, and Nemi could have 3-bet and just try to get Edward to fold pre, but I think King 3 suited is a little bit too weak to call with.
After the flop, Nemi checks, and Edward fires the continuation bet to 120,000, and with a second nut flush draw, Nemi is not going anywhere. In fact, he's going to go all in.
And now it's 395,000 for Edward to call, but he's going to quickly fold. I don't know, if I were Edward, I would have thought about it a little bit. You know that Nemi's probably not going to play a 9 like that, so that board is fairly draw heavy. It's very possible he has a draw, and it just depends on if Edward wants to get it in with ace high there and hope that it holds.
Action in this hand will start with Aaron Massey. Aaron has 25 career final tables with 8 wins and about 1.5 million in earnings. Very impressive. He folds. Amari Love here is a stock analyst in the Chicago area.
Hot.
Maria's a big fan. Edward's going to fold. George is going to fold. Now over to John Grace.
You know, I feel like people hypersexualize women in poker all the time. I'm going to start doing that with guys. I'm just going to be like, if a male bartender walks by, I'm like, he's good looking.
There you
Look
go.
at that. Look at those calves.
Maria says things like that to me all the time.
Nick raises to 80K with ace 7 offsuit, and Ryan's going to defend the big blind here with ace 4.
I always tell people I have a 6-pack. I just have a lot of insulation around it so it doesn't get cold. Flop is 3-7-5 rainbow.
And Ryan has flopped a gut shot to the wheel here. Nick has flopped top pair with the ace kicker. And Ryan's going to check it over. Nick's going to comfortably bet 85,000.
Nick had a very deep run at the 2013 World Series main event last summer. Also is a past HPT champion, has made a few HPT final tables.
I like this raise by Ryan, actually. I think a lot of the times he's just going to get Nick to fold on flop textures like this. Ryan can easily represent this flop defending from the big blind.
Call.
And Nick is going to move his entire stack in and risk his tournament life going all in. And Ryan quickly calls, and I don't love that call by Ryan because I think it's very difficult for him to feel like Nick is bluffing in this spot after Ryan check raised him. But maybe there's been some past history between these players.
Turn is the 9 of hearts. You know, when Ryan quickly called, you saw a grimace come over Nick's face. I think he thought he was beat. Usually when you get snapped like that, you are, but Nick just needs to fade the deuce on the river.
The river is the king of diamonds, and Nick is going to double up. And Ryan and Nick had very similar chip stacks at the start of this hand, so Ryan's going to be pretty much crippled now.
Almost 2.5 million in chips in that pot. Floor reconciles everything. We will take a quick break and come right back here to the East Chicagoland area for more great poker action. You're watching the HPT. Thanks for coming back to the HPT. One of these players remaining is going for the top prize of over $150,000. Let's get back to the final table and watch this action.
Amari Love still comfortably sitting as our chip leader, and with that big hand right before break, Nick Schwarman has moved up into the second spot. We've got George Dietz with 9 big blinds, and Ryan Olson, our shortest stack, knocked down after that hand to 4 big blinds.
Ryan looking for a small miracle here in a rush of cards to build up that chip stack. Blinds continuing on at 20 and 40,000 with a 5,000 chip ante, and it looks like it will be Ed Oshana under the gun here. Ed has just under 900,000 in career earnings. And now over to George Dietz. He lays it down. And this is John Grace. Started out this table second in chips. He's a 60-year-old retiree.
Nick raises to 80,000 with 9s, and Nemi calls with ace-10 suited right behind him. Action folds back around.
And that other end of the table with Aaron Massey and Amari Love, they are itching to get involved in these pots. As the flop on this hand comes deuce 4 queen with a couple of hearts.
It's a pretty good flop for both players. There's only one overcard to Nick's 9s, and Nemi's flopped the nut flush draw. And Nick decides to check it over to him, not wanting to play a big pot here. A little bit of a small ball Daniel Negreanu style here that I'm seeing.
Nick makes the call and then checks in the dark.
The turn is the 6 of hearts, and now Nemi has hit his nut flush. Nick checks it over to him again.
And this is why I like semi-bluffing with a big draw like this, because Nick may very well just put him on the queen.
Yeah, but if Nick does put him on the queen, he can't really call either. That's the problem here, that Nemi might not get paid off.
It's not a good turn card.
If Nick does call here on the turn and Nemi fires again on the river, I don't see Nick calling the river bet. So I think his decision is really going to be made here on the turn. And Nick does decide he doesn't want to face a river bet from Nemi with that board, so he is going to fold.
Nick, a very smart poker player, will play his hand very differently depending on which opponent he's against. Very ebb and flow type of a player. So a little over 700,000 in chips going into Nemi's stack. Much needed, as he's one of the shorter on the chip list. So action in this hand, it looks like it's going to be on George. And action just starts folding around the table. We're now on Nemi. Nemi plans on using whatever money he wins here to take a vacation. Boy, if he takes the top spot, he can take a private jet pretty much anywhere he wants to go.
Nemi makes it 80,000 to go with 4s here. He's been fairly active so far at this final table, but it's all been pretty standard spots.
So now we are over to Amari Love and pocket aces.
Amari's definitely found a hand that he wants to get involved with, but he is just going to flat call this raise, being a little bit sneaky here, slow playing these aces pre-flop. Edward comes in behind him with 5s.
Big flop coming. It is 4-9-9, 2 hearts.
And this is a bad flop for Amari. As you can see, Nemi has outflopped him, flopping the boat here with 4s full of 9s. And they both check it over to him. Nemi decides that he's just going to bet. He's not going to slow play this because it's very hard for people to just put him on a flop boat here.
I don't know. I think I would have checked there. It's a multi-way pot. You weren't the original raiser pre-flop. You know someone's going to fire on the turn.
I think an argument could be made for Nemi to do both things.
Amari is going to make the call, and Edward's going to get out of the way.
And Amari, there's no reason Amari should not think he has the best hand here whatsoever. He also has the ace of hearts in his hand for backup. The turn is the queen of clubs, and Amari's going to check it over to Nemi again. And now Nemi goes all in for about 75% of the pot, and I'm a little surprised at that. I think that's a little bit of a big bet, especially considering there's no way he would know that Amari has such a big hand to call with. I think I would have liked to see Nemi just bet maybe a third pot or a little less than half pot here, but Amari does quickly call. He has no reason to think that he was outflopped in the way that he was.
And now Amari needs to find an ace on the river, which does not happen. It's the 5 of hearts.
And there was nothing that Amari could do there. I think he played his hand really well, and Nemi just got lucky.
So Amari's going to have to peel some chips off of that stack. Over $2 million going to Nemi on that pot.
Time to step aside for a quick commercial break, but before we do that, I want to remind you to check us out on Facebook, and you can see the address right over my shoulder, facebook.com/HPT fans. All the latest news and information on the HPT is right there, and also check out our website at hptpoker.com. We'll be back after these messages. You're watching the HPT.
Thanks for coming back to the HPT. Maria Ho, Fred Bevel. We're at the Majestic Star Casino. Let's get right back to the table.
We have a new chip leader, Edward Oshana, now with 2.27 million. Nick Schwarman is behind him with just over 2.2 million. And Nemi's moved up quite a bit after getting a full double up off of Amari. And our short stacks are still George and Ryan with 9 and 4 big blinds respectively.
Yeah, you can see in the stack swing graphic to the extreme right of your screen, Nemi has gained almost 1.4 million since we last checked in. Amari, the opposite of that, he's lost just under $1 million since we last checked in. Blinds continuing at 20 and 40,000 with a 5,000 chip ante. As John folds, action moves over to Nick. He's going to min raise with Jack-9 suited. So action now moves over to Nemi, who is running white hot at this final table.
And Nemi's going to re-raise with Ace-King offsuit to 140,000. And I like this re-raise by Nemi. He's making the sizing a little bit small, which I don't know if I like against Nick, because Nick will peel with a lot of hands against that 3-bet sizing, and Jack-9 of diamonds is definitely one of those hands for Nick. Everybody else folds. Back to Nick, and he is going to call with the Jack-9 suited. And this is why I kind of think Nemi sizing should be a little bit bigger. Nick is a good post-flop player, and you don't really want to let him see a flop for cheap because Nick is going to know how to get away from his hand if he doesn't flop really well. But if he does, then he might be able to get Nemi's entire stack.
Flop is 9-5-4 rainbow, so Nick does hit top pair here.
Nick does outflop Nemi, and the action goes check, check. And now I feel like Nemi's hand is very face up to Nick. I think by checking back that flop, I think Nick could very safely assume that Nemi does have ace-king or ace-queen.
Well, it just gets better for Nick as the 9 of spades comes on the turn, giving him trip nines. So Nemesio drawing dead now.
And Nick is going to bet, and I think Nemi might actually call here. The board is paired, and Nemi feels like unless Nick does have 3 9s, which he does, Nemi might still be ahead with his ace-king high.
Nemi makes the call of 160,000 in chips, taking the pot to a little over 700,000.
The river is the 7 of spades, and now Nick is surely going to bet again, and if he does, I'm not really sure if Nemi should call. I think it depends a lot on the bet size that Nick makes, but I think if Nick bets anything other than half pot, it's going to be a little bit hard for Nemi to call. I think Nemi could put Nick on middle pairs, which would definitely have him beat, so could really go either way.
So Nick's going to try to get some value here on the river. What's the good bet at a 700,000 chip high, like 250?
I think if Nick puts Nemi on ace-king, which he should, then I think he should bet on the smaller side. I think 460 is probably a little bit too much. He wants Nemi to call, and it's just about if Nemi feels like Nick is bluffing here. And not that Nick can't be, but it's just if Nemi wants to risk that many chips to look him up.
And Nemi decides not to. So Nick Schwarman, he's played 3 hands. He's won all 3 hands. And that is helping his chip stack as he's going to scoop another just under 1.2 million from that pot. Again, Nick Schwarman, no stranger to the HBTs, played a few events, both here in the Chicago area as well as in Daytona, Florida. He's a champion from Daytona Beach. The kid knows what he's doing at a poker table.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with Nick's play so far. He's playing kind of a different game than I've seen him play in the past. I played with him a few times, and I think his game just is very dependent, like you said, on his opponents.
Nemi here is under the gun, wakes up with pocket jacks, and he's going to raise it to 85,000. And action folds quickly from the 9 and the 1 seat. So we move over to Aaron Massey here in the 2 seats.
Aaron just looks like he's dying to get involved, but can't really find an opportunity to do that so far.
Both he and Amari have to fold, along with Ed. So here's George. George smiles and folds. So now over to John Grace. He also lays it down. So back to Nick.
And Nick is going to defend his big blind with ace deuce offsuit. And I think Nick can defend fairly wide in his blinds because he does know how to maneuver post flop. I don't really mind this at all. And he ends up out flopping Nemi. Flop is 7 ace 6 rainbow.
So Nemi is going to fire a little pro bet here to see if his jack survived the flop, and I think he's going to find out from Nick they did not.
Nick is just going to check call. I believe there's no real value for him to check raise in this spot. And I think with Nemi's hand and with that turn being the 7 of clubs, I think it's just going to go check check here on the turn.
You are correct, my friend. Nemi is going to check back. So onto the river we go.
The river is the 9 of hearts, and now I think Nick feels fairly certain that he could bet this river. There's a chance that sometimes Nemi will check back an ace there on the turn because he's afraid of the 7. But, you know, Nick still wants to get some value from his hand. He makes it 230,000 on the river. And once again, Nemi's kind of in a tough spot, just like that ace-king situation. It's not the greatest run out for his jacks here, but, you know, how many times can you really not look Nick up?
Well said, Maria, and you're right. He is going to look Nick up, and Nick is going to show the winning hand.
And I think that's just indicative of game flow. I think one hand you decide to fold to someone on the river, and the next time you decide, well, I folded last time, so I'm going to call. But that doesn't necessarily make it the right call. But, you know, it's definitely player psychology.
So Nick played 4 hands, has won 4 pots. He's batting 1,000 at this final table. His blinds continue at 20 and 40,000 with a 5,000 chip ante. And action in this hand will start with the 9 seat of Joseph Hebda. He's been quiet so far.
An ace 4 diamonds is a good hand for his stack, but he's not going to move it all in. He's going to leave himself 5,000 behind, obviously calling it off.
Maybe he just forgot he was capping his cards with a 5K chip or something. No real need to leave yourself just 5K behind. Action is on John Grace. He decides to fold. So we have Nick and Nemi in the blinds. I suspect Maria and one of them are going to call.
Definitely the big blind should call with 1 blind in against a 3 big blind stack. And Nick wants to come in 2 from the small blind, calling with 7-5 of hearts. And Nemi folds the big blind. I don't know what he had, but must have been really bad.
All right, I'll wait and see the flop.
Safe flop.
Oh, and they're going to wait for the flop to put it in. So the flop is 3 queen 3, 2 spades.
Nick bets 5,000 in chips, which is going to put Ryan all in. And Ryan is going to go into the turn and river ahead as Nick has whiffed the flop here.
It's about all you could ask for in this situation. It turns the 5 though, and it quickly takes the wind out of Ryan's sails. He is now behind, but an ace or a deuce could win him the pot and save his tournament life.
The river is the 10 of clubs. So our first elimination at this final table is Ryan Olson. Just really couldn't get anything going and didn't play a whole lot, but when he did play, it didn't work out for him. So 8-handed poker when we come back to the HPT. Welcome back to the HPT. This lovely lady is Maria Ho. My name is Fred Bevel. We are at the Majestic Star Casinos here in Gary, Indiana. Let's get right back to this final table.
Not surprising to see Nick Schwarman now overtaking the top spot on our leaderboard with 3.38 million. Edward Oshana is in second with 2.2 million. Amari's rebounded a little bit from that hand earlier and is at 2 million. And now our short stack is George Dietz on life support with 4 big blinds.
Blinds are going up. They are now 25 and 50,000 with a 5,000 chip ante. Action in this hand starts on the 8 seed of Nemi, and both he and Joe lay their hands down, as well as Aaron. So quickly we're on Amari Love, who raises it to 105,000 with King Jack.
And Amari raised from the hijack now to George on the button with 4 big blinds, and he's going to move all in with ace 5 of spades.
Now it's John Grace's turn to decide. He folds over to Nick Schwarman now. With the massive chip wall he has separating him and John. Nick's going to fold.
Amari's going to quickly call the remainder of that re-raise, 65,000 more. Going to be somewhat of a flip here, 60-40. George in the lead.
So both players table their hand, and George is going to see, could be worse. He's going to the flop ahead, but Amari's got 2 live cards.
George all in for his tournament life. And the flop is King Deuce Deuce Rainbow, and Amari has outflopped him, pairing his king. George is looking for an ace on the turn or the river.
Also hoping for the turn to give him a sweat for a straight draw, but that doesn't happen as the king of spades giving Amari the boat, and George will be drawing dead going into the river, and will also be our 8th place finisher here at this final table.
George taking home over 17,000 for his efforts here today. Not a bad payday at all. A little disappointing, but I'm sure he'll feel fine in the morning.
He shakes the hands of all the players at the table, wishes them luck as we continue on at 25 and 50 with a 5,000 chip ante. Amari Love in the big blind, putting Edward Oshana under the gun.
Edward decides to open under the gun with 5-4 clubs to 110,000. I think sometimes it's fine to open with those hands. You know, people like to say under the gun is the new button, so obviously people are starting to widen their ranges. And if you have somewhat of a tight image, I think it's good because it's hard for players to put you on a hand like that. It really just depends on how the table's playing. If you have a lot of loose, aggressive players behind you, you'd probably want to fold a hand like 5-4 suited under the gun.
Under the gun is the new button. I have not heard that. The more stealing happening from the left in poker these days?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why there's a lot more re-stealing. You'll see a lot of people 3-betting the under the gun raids are very, very light these days. John calls with ace-jack suited. Nick follows suit with 3s. Nemi with king 10 suited also calls. Everybody wants to get involved, it seems.
Aaron has to fold, and Amari, I'm sure he's hoping to wake up with a hand to re-raise here. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen as he peels back Queen 7. But given all the action in this pot, I can't see him folding Queen 7.
He decides that he wants to try to get lucky on this flop.
So 5 players in the hand.
And the flop is 6-6 Jack, Rainbow. And the only person that really helps is John. He has jacks and 6s. It's not really a good flop for anybody else. Let's see if Edward feels like c-betting this.
Boy, I don't know. With this kind of traffic in the hand, I don't think the c-bet strategy is really good here to try to push everybody off the hand, but he is going to fire 185,000.
And if I were John, I would just call here. There are people behind you to act. There's real no point to raise. You know that you probably have the best hand here, but there's not really any reason to bloat the pot at this stage.
Plus, raising here, I think, could really be scary if you got 3-bet.
I think it's not good to raise here for 2 reasons. Like you said, it opens you up to the possibility of being 3-bet. And also, you know, you're going to lose action on boards like this from a lot of players too.
Amari Love getting tricky now. He is going to make it 500,000.
Amari decides that he wants to rep the 6 in his hand, being that he had called from the big blind. And you know what? I actually don't mind this play because a lot of the times John might have a jack, but it might be a weaker jack than ace jack. And if he has a hand like 9s or 8s or 10s, you know, it's an easy fold.
Amari's nickname is Doc, so around the poker world, he's known as Doc Love.
And John's going to make a really disciplined fold here. I might have called one and decided on a later street if I were John, but you know, I don't really like Amari showing right here. I don't think there's a point to show people that you're capable of making these bluffs at this stage. I think you'd rather keep that under the radar, actually. I think you would gain a lot more chips that way.
Let's take a break from the fun action at this final table and tune into A Poker Life featuring legendary pro Doyle Texas Dolly Brunson, brought to us by our friends at Ace Play Poker. You know, back in the day, all of Doyle's peer groups had won the main event championship. Doyle now tells us what it was like to one-up his buddies and win 2 back-to-back main event championships.
Yeah, I got over half the chips the first day, and the second day I probably had 3/4 of the entire chips in the tournament, and it just got down to Bones Berlin and myself, and I didn't think about the 10 deuce, didn't raise with it. I just happened to be in the blind. He had the button and he didn't raise it. The turn came a 10-5 deuce, and I checked it, and he checked it. And he had an 8 and a 5, and the next card was a 5. And I let off and made some kind of a bet, and then he moved the rest of his chips in. And I had the 10 deuce again, and I called him with 10s and deuces. And the last card again was a 10, made me 10s full with deuces again. And I didn't place any significant on that at the time. I didn't, and then they started calling the 10 deuce the Brunson, which I didn't like that either, but again, there's nothing you can do about it. And I tell people, folks, that's a bad hand, don't be playing that hand. But they continually, on Twitter and so forth, they tell me about pots they play with the 10 deuce.
Yet another elimination here in Gary, Indiana at the Majestic Star Casino. It's time to step aside for a quick commercial break, but before I do, I want to thank the entire staff here at Majestic Star, all the dealers, the floor staff. Everybody's done a great job, and the HPT always loves doing events here in Gary, Indiana. Don't go too far. More final table action after this quick break.
Thanks for coming back to the HPT, where over $150,000 is on the line for the last player standing. Let's get right back to this final table.
Nick Schwarman not only maintains but increases his chip lead to $3.6 million. Amari Love is in the second spot now with over $3 million. And our short stack is Joseph Hebda with $850,000, which is about 17 big blinds.
Amari Love's gained just over $1 million in chips since we last checked in. John Grace is the one on the big downside with losing just under $600,000 as blinds continue at $25,000 and $50,000 with a 5,000 chip ante. And it looks like Nemi is under the gun this hand. Nemi plans on using whatever he wins today on the HPT to take a little vacation with a wife and kids.
It's a nice way to spend your poker earnings, I think. Nemi raises to 100,000 with Jack-10 offsuit. And Amari's going to call here with 8-7 of clubs from the cutoff. It kind of looks like he is opening up his calling range a little bit here, which opens up Edward's calling range as well from the button, King-3 suited.
Some loose calls being made as we go to the flop.
And the flop is 6-8-3 rainbow. And Amari has paired his 8. And Nemi decides that he probably made a little bit of a loose open with Jack-10, and he doesn't really want a continuation bet this board against 2 players in position.
Amari's going to fire, makes it 150,000 with top pair.
And Edward with bottom pair here is thinking about calling, I'm sure. He's wondering if Amari is just trying to represent this flop, but really has overcards.
Call.
So Edward is going to make the call. And I'm suspecting Edward's hoping Amari's going to check the turn here and open the door for him as the king of spades falls.
And actually now Edward has improved to kings and 3s. And I think Amari is going to check this card. And now Edward, I'm sure, is going to go for a value bet with his 2 pair.
And it looks like you are correct again, my friend.
I think betting half pot here is probably good. He bets a little less than that. He bets 185,000, and Amari's going to quickly call. I think that there's no reason for him to fold to this bet here on the turn. I think he's going to make his decision on the river.
It's a call.
That's a call.
Oh, it's a call. My bad.
So both players going to the river, a little over $1 million in chips in the pot right now.
Queen of Hearts.
The river is the Queen of Hearts, and now there's a chance that Amari is going to fold to Edward's bet. I'm not really sure what hand Amari can put Edward on, but at the same time, it's just not a good run out for his pair baits.
560.
And Edward is going to bet half pot this time, 560,000. And the thing is it's a little bit curious to Amari what kind of hand Edward calls the flop with that can bet the turn or the river. Edward's range is pretty polarized here. He either, has a big hand like 2 pair, or he doesn't have anything really. He could have, some kind of busted draws, or, maybe ace high, but
Why you don't show?
he can't really call the river, and he is going to fold.
You don't show.
So Eddie's going to scoop a nice sized pot worth over 1.6 million in chips, and Amari Doc Love is going to have to lick his wounds. And
Makes the final cut.
it will. It did,
You're not gonna
Amari.
want to see that one.
Don't you worry about us, buddy. Blinds continuing at 25 and 50,000, and I think everybody at the table wanted to see what Ed was playing that last hand. He had the goods.
Nick has ace queen suited and raises to 100,000.
Yes.
And Nemi is going to make the call.
Nemi calls with ace-3 suited, which, we saw him call earlier, raise with ace-10 of hearts, which is a much better hand than ace-3 suited, and I just think Nemi's starting to fall into the trap of maybe calling with too many suited, connected type cards, which is definitely a leak sometimes.
Action now back to Ed Oshana. It looks like he's going to play this hand. Looked like he had king 5 offsuits. Not a hand I would choose to play out of position in a raise pot, but he is going to re-raise it and represent a big one here.
Yeah, and you know what? I think he thinks this is a good squeeze spot, and it very well could be. I mean, Nick is fairly active at this final table. So far he has had the hands to do it with. But, this puts Nick in a very tough spot. I think Nick is going to call because his hand is suited here, but he doesn't love it. It's definitely not easy to think that you're ahead here with ace-queen against, a small blind 3-better. But, I don't like the fact that Nemi's reaching for chips. I think all he could really hope for is to flop a flush, and he's not really getting the odds for that extra 3%.
Majestic.
Nemi is going to lay it down. So on to the flop we go. Heads up between Nick and Ed.
The flop is 10-8-4 rainbow, and I think if Edward can follow through here with his squeeze play, he's going to be able to get Nick off his hand. Nick was obviously hoping to hit the flop, and he doesn't. He doesn't even have a flush draw. So let's see if Edward can get Nick to fold this flop.
He is going to put Nick to a test worth 260,000 in chips. which swells the pot to almost 1.1 million, and I don't see Nick folding for that.
Yeah, I think this sizing is making Nick call for his backdoor possibilities and also in the hopes that maybe he could get Edward to shut down on the turn.
Turn card, please. 7 of hearts.
The turn is the 7 of hearts, so no help for either player. Nick's still ahead with just ace high, and you're right, Maria, that is going to slow Ed down, and I suspect Nick will pounce on this.
Yeah, I think Nick feels like maybe he might need to turn his hand into a bluff here. It's not really that reasonable for him to believe that he had the best hand, and just in case Edward has ace-king, Nick doesn't want to let this hand go to showdown.
Nick fires a big one, 420,000 in chips, and that should be enough to get Ed off this hand. And he is going to lay it down. You know, Marie, I mentioned earlier, Nick has been active at this final table, but he's also won the pots he's been involved with. This one worth a little over 1.7 million.
With a few players eliminated, now those pay jumps are starting to get more and more significant. Come back for all of that action.
Welcome back to the HPT. This lovely lady is Maria Ho. My name is Fred Bevel. We are at the Majestic Star Casinos here in Gary, Indiana. Let's get right back to this final table.
Nick Schwarman shows no signs of slowing down. He is trying to pull away from the pack, and he has 4.6 million at the moment. Amari Love has 2.25 million, and we have Nemi and Joseph here with similar stacks, about 17 big blinds each.
Nick gaining almost $1 million in chips since we last checked in. The guy has been white hot at this final table as blinds continue on at 25 and 50,000 with a 5,000 chip ante.
We haven't seen Aaron Massey play very many hands here. He has the kind of stack size where, you know, he can't mess around too much, and I think he's just trying to find a good spot.
It looks like he's going to play this hand, and you're right, he hasn't been too active, but pocket kings will wake anybody up. He raises to 100,000. And action folds around now to John Grace.
John looks down at King Queen suited, and that's definitely a pretty good hand. John only has 24 big blinds though, and he announces a re-raise. I think with John's hand, I feel like I would just call. He has just around the stack size where, he has just about the stack size where 3-bet shoving with that hand is a little bit too much. But, you know, just folding, the hand is too good to fold as well.
Aaron is going to move all in here.
And that should put John in a really tough spot. I mean, you can't like it when the person who raised is now going to 4-bet shove and it's your tournament life on the line. And that's also kind of the problem with 3-betting King Queen of Spades here is you don't get to see a flop when it's a hand that flops tremendously well. And, you know, now if you call it, you're really not going to like it.
Let it go.
I love how Aaron's trying to talk him out of it. I feel like it's kind of a reverse tell here. He obviously doesn't want him to fold.
Well, Aaron, the original raiser, and then he just re-raises you. King Queen has got to fold here. As much as I love the hand, it's crushed.
I mean, even Fred would fold. So, John, you got to.
Calling anybody short.
And this is the point where I think a lot of players like to, in their head, think about the hands that they can beat to justify a bad call here. And I just think John has put himself in a really bad predicament 3-betting with King Queen suited.
If John's going to open speculate pocket 9s or 10s, that makes Aaron really happy. And he does make the call, Maria. And he's going to find out he is just absolutely crushed.
Change my mind.
Absolutely crushed.
Aaron was able to talk him into it, and I think John kind of talked himself into it. He is going to need to find a flush or trip queens here, or possibly a straight in order to double up. Otherwise, he'll be our 7th place finisher.
Over $2.5 million in this pot as we go to the flop with John Grace's life on the line.
There's a king in that window. That's not a good sign for John. 9-3, 2 diamonds to follow. Looks like Aaron's flop top set, and John's going to need some running straight cards.
2% is John's chance as we go to the turn. And you could hear John, he's hoping to find 10 jack. It'd have to be perfect, perfect. The ace of hearts on the turn is going to have John drawing dead, and he will be our 7th place finisher at this final table. Insignificant 8 of hearts falls on the river.
John Grace just couldn't get himself to lay down King Queen there, and he is going to go home with $21,347.
What an exciting final table this has turned out to be. I gotta admit, Ms. Ho, I'm not surprised a bit. We started with 9. We will continue next time with 6. But Maria, those first 3 eliminations were quite exciting. What is your take on the play so far today?
Well, I think a lot of these players have a lot of final table experience, so they use that to feel all of the other players out, which I think is a good starting point. Now it's time to really use that information against your opponents.
Boy, you know, I've said it before. If you're not using Maria as a teacher while watching the HPT, you're really not getting as much as you can out of this show. Now, do you think you have what it takes to sit at an HPT final table and compete for unreal money on a worldwide stage? Well, log on to hptpoker.com and find an event near you. For Maria Ho and James Larson, I'm Fred Bevel. We'll see you next time right here on the HPT.
Mama, cause I'm sending you back. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand. Last man standing with the money in my hand. I'll be the last man standing with the money in my hand.